Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It is a pleasure to be with you, and I'm always glad to take your calls at 866-HEY-LARS. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Tom Harris, who is Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. Mr. Harris, good to have you back on the program.
Yeah, good to be on, Lars.
A lot of us are hoping that President Trump, along with getting rid of James Comey today, is also going to get rid of the Paris Agreement, at least get the United States of America out of this agreement. But even if we do that, is that going far enough?
No, it's not, because, it basically is like a dandelion. If you just cut the top off the heads, your lawn looks pretty good for a day or two until it grows back. You have to get to the root of the dandelion. And in this case, the root of the Paris Agreement is the UN Climate Agreement, the UN Climate Treaty that was signed in 1992 by George Bush. And, if Trump is going to keep his promise to stop all payments of U.S. tax dollars to UN global warming programs, as he put it, he has to get out of the original UN climate treaty, because it's not just Paris. There's all kinds of other things like the $100 billion Green Fund that are all still coming from that original 1992 UN climate treaty.
So what does it take to get out of that?
Takes just 1 year, and Trump can do it himself without Senate approval. It's kind of interesting, Lars, to get into that treaty, and it was a treaty. They needed a two-thirds majority of the Senate. But I've consulted legal experts in the United States, and they tell me that no, Trump can get out of that treaty the same way he could get out of NAFTA, for example, with Canada. He can do it just on his own, and he can do it with 1 year's notice right now.
See, the thing I worried about is I thought but this was a treaty, the UN treaty, that had never been ratified by the Senate, right?
Well, no, you're thinking of the Kyoto Protocol.
No,
what happens?
Well, the reason I ask that is I thought at one point I was talking to a treaty lawyer, and I said, how do you get out of a treaty? He says, you have to have all the other signatories agree to let you out of it. Is that not the case with the UN climate treaty?
No, it's not. And in fact, it says very specifically that right in the treaty itself, it says that any party, by delivering a letter to the depository, which is the group in the UN that receives these things, they will actually be out of the agreement if they just say so with 1 year's notice. And it's one of the actual articles right in the treaty. You see, the trouble with Paris is that you have to wait for 3 years from when Paris came into force, and then you have to give 1 year's notice. Now, Paris came into force last November, so that means you couldn't give a notice until November 2019, and means you wouldn't be out until 2020, which is right at the end of Trump's presidency. So if you follow the UN's process for treaties and things like the Paris Agreement, you can't get out of Paris until 2020. But you can get out of the UN Climate Treaty, which is the foundation of Paris. And it says right in both treaties, it says point blank that if you get out of the Foundation Treaty, which, by the way, is called the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UN Climate Treaty signed in 1992, if you get out of that, you're out of every other agreement, including Paris. And so that's the way to do it. If you want to get out of Paris, dig up the roots of the whole thing. And then you're out of Paris, you're out of the UN Green Climate Fund, you're out of this ridiculous Warsaw agreement they had, where we're going to be held responsible for loss and damage in other countries. That's something that is the Trojan horse in all this.
Yeah, because what do you do when one of these little island nations starts to say, because you Americans have been running your factories and driving your SUVs, the water levels have risen in our country and caused certain parts of our country to disappear or no longer be useful. Please write us a check for $10 billion. And they can make that case in a court, can't they?
Oh, exactly, because since the United States is still in the Framework Convention, then the things that came out of it, including the Paris Agreement and this Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, as they're called, that was signed in 2013 in Warsaw, Poland. And what that is, it's a new UN legal framework that holds developed nations like us to a potential liability of trillions of dollars for the impact of extreme weather events in developing countries that are supposedly our fault. Okay? And this is really insane, because what it means, and in fact, they don't know to what extent the charges against us would be retroactive. So, a small island, for example, that says our sea level has been rising for the last 20 years, or we had a tsunami 10 years ago, we want you, the West, to pay for it because you caused it. Okay, so if Trump says that this whole UN climate thing is a hoax and, in fact, we're not causing dangerous climate change, then he's got to go the whole bore. He's got to dig up the roots. He can't do what Canada did. I mean, back in 2011, we withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol, which was very similar to the Paris Agreement. It was based on the Framework Convention, but we didn't get out of the Framework Convention. So when the Conservatives lost power, it was very easy for the new Liberal government to simply agree to another Framework Convention treaty, in this case, the Paris Agreement. So you've got to get out of the Framework Convention so that these Paris things don't keep coming back over and over and over.
I'm with you. And I guess the case I'd hope the president would make, and I've never heard numbers like this, but Tom, maybe you know them. I think you could make the case that if America froze all of its current environmental regulations on factories, on automobiles, on all the processes we do, power generation, the fact that we're, getting rid of older cars, buying newer cars, that companies on their own are already upgrading, not necessarily because the government tells them to, but because it makes good business to run more efficient machines that use less energy and put less into the atmosphere. It seems to me that America's air has been getting cleaner and cleaner, and that it's going to continue to get cleaner and cleaner as old technology gets, run to the junkyard and the new technology takes its place. If we were to even freeze all the regulations today and say, we're not going to adopt any new ones, aren't we on a path where we would continue to see cleaner air, cleaner water, and less waste going into the future? And so we can tell the rest of the world, we're there. Even if we didn't do anything else, you folks are the ones, China, India, Mexico, et cetera, who are still pumping tons of junk into the air. And when you get to where we are, then you can start finding fault with the way we do business.
Yeah, exactly. And, right now we could indeed talk about foreign aid to these countries to help them develop cleanly. Now, that would be something that would fall under the State Department. It would have nothing to do with the environment. It would simply be a development that we would actually try to help countries, and that would be a legitimate debate. Because right now, China, for example, and India put out a great deal of air pollution that eventually affects us. The Asian brown cloud drifts across the Pacific Ocean and causes higher air pollution in the western part of North America. But that would be an entirely different debate. It wouldn't be a matter of us being responsible for causing their problems. It would be us reaching out a hand to help them to the degree we feel we can. And that would be a legitimate debate, and that certainly is something I would support. But the idea that we are responsible for their climate problems or the other things that are occurring in their countries, that makes no sense at all. The science is not there. It does not back it up. And Trump has said that. So now he's got to put those words into action and actually get us out of these treaties that are based on the idea that we somehow in the West are guilty of causing climate problems when we're not.
You can find Tom's work at climatescienceinternational.net. Tom, it's good to have you back on the program. Thanks for the time.
Okay, thanks, Lars.
Glad to have you on. Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. Coming up, some of the cornerstone jobs of our society are now ranked some of the worst jobs in society. Up next, the best and worst jobs for 2017. And your phone calls and emails right here on The Lars Larson Show.
The Lars Larson Show.